Gripping the mic like it's a bottle of booze. What are you standing there holding that mic for, Mr. Judd? Give. Great, thank you. Miss Barron needs it. Thank you, Mr. Judd.
Might I note that all of these aisles are much too narrow.
They are. I was going to speak to Greg about it.
Thank you. Sherry Barron, Precinct 7. I just have a question for Ms. Kowalski. On the surface, I think I'm in favor of this, but I'm wondering if this is coming to us as a result of demand. I mean, you mentioned that there was a business in Somerville that, I think you said Somerville, that didn't come in because of a zoning issue. And my sense is that the mixed use that's here now at the Capitol and the Heights and the East has probably been there for over 100 years, because years ago, when you had a business on the first floor and you didn't have a car, it made sense for you to live upstairs. So I'm just wondering if this is being done as a result, or you're offering this as a result to demand.
The redevelopment board hasn't had a developer come to it and say, I want to do mixed use. There have been a couple property owners who have contemplated it, but have decided, no, it can't be done, I'm not going to try. We haven't had anyone come to the redevelopment board and say, I want to assemble parcels, and no. So the short answer is no. I'm sorry, Carol Kowalski, Director of Planning and Community Development. Excuse me, I forgot the second part of your question.
Well, no, it was just a comment that the mixed use that exists, notwithstanding the two new projects, and I don't know where else in town there would be enough space for a project like either of those.
Right.
So, for example, the apartments over the Capitol, I would assume they've been there for 100 years.
Yes, they predate our zoning. Zoning was created, really, the trend when zoning was initially adopted across the country was to segregate uses. The buildings I showed were probably all put up before Arlington adopted zoning.
Okay, but to answer my question, this is not being brought forth as a result to someone coming knocking on the door as demand for business coming to Arlington.
No, it's intended to, I would hope that we could recruit business to Arlington by allowing an innovative way to create incentives to bring business. So I would hope it would create new business opportunities in Arlington, but it's not offered in response to a specific request.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. Thank you, Ms. Kowalski. Linda Foster? Yep. Adam Foster. Adam. Hoster. My gosh. It's first night. I can't remember everybody's name right off the bat.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I am Adam Foster. I'm the member from Precinct 3. And this is obviously a very complex piece of legislation. And I don't feel that I fully understand every detail, but I wanted to sort of generally say that this seems very much the best way for Arlington to grow, and that just sort of keeping an eye on the big picture, we should think about, are there really any better alternatives? Where would we want stuff to go that would be better than, along the main business corridors in town? Density is always tricky, but in this case, if we really want those great stores, the little cheese shop, the stuff that people that I talk to fantasize about whenever there's a vacancy and people on the Arlington list say, oh, I'd like to see this and that, there's got to be more density to support it. People in East Arlington have been hearing a lot lately about vibrant streetscape and that whole sort of sexy idea, and it's a very appealing idea. People who have talked to me know that I don't think we will get it just on the basis of redesigning a road. there needs to be more density. So the question is how to do that, and I think that generally this is a good way to do that, and I'd like to support the approach that this is where our growth ought to happen, at least for the medium and maybe the long term.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jameson?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. By way of introduction, we heard several times in the introductory remarks by various people about growth. There are some members of this body, and I'm sure some residents out there, that don't want any growth to happen in Arlington. The problem is we don't have a physically sustainable long-term situation. We have what's called a structural deficit. Many of us have heard of that. I'm sure Mr. Toski and his FinCom members could elaborate on that at greater length for you. So the opposition to so you have growth on one side, and we have the overrides on the other. Okay, it's not just a growth or no growth question. It's a question of a balance between those two, and so I'm in favor of growth in town, and I'm in favor of smart growth that I know Ms. Rowe talked about a lot when she first joined the board. And I hope that this type of measure that I hope we will pass tonight will drive demand along our business corridors so we can have growth and approach financial stability long term without having to do overrides. So as I mentioned, I rise in favor. And cutting to the chase in response to a previous speaker's comments, could I have the picture of the yellow building up, please, with the extension to the zenith?
Might take a second.
Yeah.
If you want to keep going.
So my question to to whoever the moderator wishes to direct it, probably someone over on his left, is the impression I got from the previous speaker's presentation was that you could build the yellow monstrosity on the right by right. And just by passing this, we would provide someone with the ability to build that. Is that the case, that they could build that by right?
Mr. Fitzsimmons?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Oh, introduce yourself. You go ahead.
Bruce Fitzsimmons, Chair of the ARB. The short answer to Mr. Jameson's question is no. What's really important to remember about this article is that in every instance, mixed use can only be allowed by special permit with EDR, Environmental Design Review. Previously, Carol Kowalski showed you a slide with the 12 criteria that we follow for EDR, and I won't read all of them, but the one that's most directly to Mr. Jameson's point is item number 2, relation of buildings to environment, which requires that the proposed development shall be related harmoniously to the terrain and to the use, scale, and architecture of existing buildings in the vicinity that have functional or visual relationship to the proposed buildings. I'm going to go out on a limb and predict that none of my colleagues would find that that yellow monstrosity matches harmoniously to the building next door.
Mr. Moderator, if I may have a follow-up?
Yes, so you still have time.
Okay, and that beyond that aesthetic, if I may, parameter, that the size of the building would also be driven by the, so let me back up. One of the advantages that was presented about adopting this article is that we don't have to meet the parking for the residential and the parking for the business as a sum, okay? But if I understand correctly, there still will be parameters upon which the parking will drive the volume capacity of the building. So if there were 3 spots behind this building, there's no way you could build a 5-story monstrosity.
Well, that's correct, because you would have, if you need 1 parking space for each 750 square feet of commercial development and 1 parking space per residential dwelling, you wouldn't have enough parking on site to make that building qualify.
So is it my conclusion that this representation falsely represents what we're voting on tonight, and I strongly urge passage of this measure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Doherty? James?
I rise to support this article in general. I do have one concern. I happen to own a property that is in the B1 district. The property is abutted on both sides by a B5 zoning district, gas stations on both sides. To the rear of one of the gas stations running on a side street, Quincy Street, off Mass Ave, is a two-family home that is zone B5 as well. The concern I have with this is it allows for this type of development with the constraints, as the chairman just outlined, for all the business districts with the exception of B1. Now, certainly from my standpoint, one could construe the comment as self-serving, but I think it's far greater than that. There's a patchwork, as it was shown on the zoning map, going up and down Mass Ave, whole patchwork of different different B districts. And in those districts, a lot of them abut. To try to drive the development that I think we all want, which is good, controlled development in the town, the only way you're going to achieve that, and to the point I think the previous speaker was pointing out, a lot of these parcels are too small to create any of this smart growth. So you have to assemble parcels, and I think the board clearly must have thought some of that through when they put this forward. But what I would like to do is amend the article by simply striking the one sentence that excludes B1 and leaving that in there as well. So, for example, if someone wanted to buy my property, either one of the gas stations on either side, or someone wanted to buy all three of those parcels, and mine is not the only example, there's numerous examples of this that are in these various districts, they would be allowed to do this. Because theoretically, going back to that previous slide, on two sides of my property, one could basically build, not that monstrosity that I don't think anyone could see being built, nor do I think a board would approve that. But clearly it would inhibit the goal of this article, which would be to be able to assemble various properties so that you could come out with some type of decent development. The only other comment that I want to make, and I speak as myself, although I'm the chairman of the Board of Assessors, and I'm very well versed in taxation and in income producing properties, is the town should not be driven to zoning based on the idea that we are going to be able to create enough commercial or industrial density in this community to have classification. I will go out, as the prior chairman mentioned, his board, but I would suggest to you that it would be impossible for us, if we rezoned a large majority of this community, commercial industrial property, to ever get a mix that will give us substantial base on commercial to have a classified tax rate in this town. It just won't happen. The other thing, when we point out the old-time Oldsmobile site, which is the site that was shown across from the Jason Russell House, a lot of us who were here back then, a CVS was going to go in there, or a Walgreens or something to that effect. We actually rezoned all the large automotive sites because we didn't want to see any of those dealerships and gas station or automotive uses. That site over there was developed that way through a whole host of reasons why it came about. Similarly, at the corner of Mill Street and Summer Street, you have another residential development, which was the old Stevens Foundry. If you look at any of those in terms of what they were valued and what they contributed in tax dollars to this community as commercial properties, as opposed to what they contribute now in property tax, they're multiples what they contribute. And what I would argue is that in both of those instances, and I think there's many more, the old Texaco station in East Arlington, which was a very nice development that was done, not a lot of those units add to the overall cost of this community. I don't believe, I don't have the facts here, but I think people could probably rationalize. You do not have a lot of children living in any of those three complexes. So although I, like a lot of residential people, would love to see a commercial tax rate like in Burlington or Lexington or these other communities that are along the 128 belt, it's never going to happen here. So I do support this, but I support it simply from a growth standpoint and smart development versus as a goal to try to get revenue. The fact of the matter is that residential on a price per square foot brings in more revenue in this town than commercial space does. Thank you.
Did you want to put a motion forward? If so, you have to do it in writing.
Okay, I didn't know. I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator. I thought for a simple change like that, we could just
No, you
strike
just-
the one line. But
Well, if you just put it in writing, then we'll get it seconded.
okay,
Thank you. Ms. LaCourte?
I also have a question, Mr. Moderator, through you to Ms. Kowalski.
Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
And my question is, okay, I gotta reorganize myself here because Gordon already asked the first question that I had. So, sorry, I'm blanking. The question is about the other parcel that Chris talked about, the Brigham's development, and whether or not it would be likely that we would ever allow someone to define as mixed use a parcel on which the majority of what they were building was residential and only a small part was commercial. How are you envisioning using this? And then the follow-up question is about the relationship of this change to master planning.
Go ahead, Ms. Kowalski.
I'll address, I'm Carol Kowalski, Director of Planning and Community Development. I'll address the first part, and I think the Chairman is going to address the second part of your question. One thing you have to bear in mind with the Brigham's parcel, on the parking, you would still have to have the parking setbacks, the parking screening, and there are landscaping requirements for parking lots of certain sizes. Those would all still have to apply to the Brigham site. And I'll let the Chairman address the second part of your question. Thank you.
Mr. Fitzsimmons?
Thank you. Bruce Fitzsimmons, Chair of the ARB. With respect to the master plan, that's a significant undertaking. It probably takes about 2 years to go through the process of putting a master plan together. It involves community outreach. It involves bringing people together to talk about various things that are important to them. It will inevitably result in some zoning articles, but we're probably not looking at having action on those zoning articles before a town meeting for probably 3 years. And in that time frame, development pressures on these sites will continue to take place. The clock's not going to stop ticking in the development community on these projects while they wait for the master plan to come into place. So yes, it would be great to have this as part of the master plan discussion, but there's no reason why we couldn't have an incremental step and put this into place now and then come back and incorporate it into the master plan.
And given that there's no actual projects planned at the moment that would use mixed use, what you're suggesting, I think, is that this would be a tool that we would have in our toolbox when we see what kind of development we want to encourage under the master plan. So in other words, we would have control of this because of special permit and EDR.
That's correct. And, you know, I think the fact that we're not seeing a lot of desire to put up mixed-use projects is because it's simply too hard to do so under the current zoning code, where you have to meet both the residential requirement and the business or commercial requirement. So another tool in the toolbox that can be used to help developers, to encourage developers to try mixed use, I think would be beneficial.
Right. So let me ask you another question then about special permit and EDR. The CVS that was built next to the high school.
Tie it into the article. I mean,
Yeah, it does tie to the article, trust me. So what we're saying is that special permit and EDR for mixed-use development protects us from the kind of things that Mr. Loretti is saying would be a danger that we would risk. My recollection when we did the CVS development was that there were things that we did not feel like we could require of that property developer even though we were under special permit. Can you walk me back through that process and reassure me that I'm recalling this incorrectly or something?
Sure. The CVS property started off with a much different design than what you see now. At one point, the store was going to be significantly set back from Mass Ave. There was going to be a parking lot in the front yard. We were going to have a large pylon sign that might be more appropriate for a shopping center along the freeway as opposed to on Mass Ave. So I know that there are critics of the CVS store, but I think if you were to start with what was originally presented to the board, you'll see that it was significantly scaled back. We go through a pretty rigorous design review process. We're very fortunate to have an architect and a landscape architect on the board. We look at things like traffic circulation, drainage, utilities to the site. It's really a pretty thorough process, and I think it's going to take out the undesirable elements that you would see. I think the comments that were suggested about all the horrendous things that could happen with this article gave the impression that developers would be able to do this as of right. And that's not the case at all. It's all through the EDR process.
Thank you.